Two girls vanished 4 years ago, until a mountain woman's dog exposed the truth inside a cave. The first frost of autumn had come early to Echo Ridge. The air hung low and wet, the kind that clung to skin and stayed in your lungs long after you'd stopped breathing. Nora Hayes stood on her porch, a chipped enamel mug steaming in her hand, listening to the silence. The forest below her cabin was still, a silence too clean, too perfect. It wasn't peace. It was the kind that came after something had been taken. Ranger broke it. The German shepherd's bark cut through the fog like a warning shot. 1, 2, pause. Then a long growl that vibrated through the boards beneath Nora's boots. She froze, coffee sloshing onto her flannel sleeve. "What is it, boy?" she murmured, but he was already moving, ears up, muscles taut, eyes locked on the slope behind the cabin. She grabbed her parka and followed. The ridge descended into a tangle of pine and alder, the earth slick with needles and mist. Ranger's paws moved fast and certain, tail low, body close to the ground. He wasn't chasing, he was tracking. Nora had seen that posture before, back when she worked with FEMA, searching collapsed buildings for survivors. "Easy," she called, her breath forming ghosts in the cold air. Ranger stopped near a limestone outcrop, half hidden behind a mess of wind-tangled brush. He let out a short, sharp bark, then another, lower, deliberate. Not excitement. A signal. Nora's pulse kicked. "Show me." The dog lowered his nose, pawing at the earth until the damp soil gave way to something else. Fabric, pale and soft against the dark ground. Nora knelt and brushed away the dirt. A handkerchief, small, embroidered with a swan. The edges were frayed, but the fabric smelled faintly of antiseptic. Clean. Preserved. Not something that had been buried for 4 years. She turned it over in her hands, the swan's thread glinting faintly in the weak light. It took her a second to place where she'd seen that symbol before. Then it hit her. The Carver sisters. 4 years ago, 2 girls, June, 10, and Maddie, 7, had vanished from a parking lot 2 counties over. No trace, no ransom. The story had haunted every front page for months, then faded like all unsolved things do. Nora's stomach clenched. She remembered the photo, June with the handkerchief tucked in her pocket, smiling shyly. Her grandmother made them, the article had said. So the girls always have a piece of home. Ranger whined, drawing her back. He was staring at the slab of limestone, nose quivering. She crouched beside him. The rock was propped oddly against the ridge, as if nature had placed it there with intent. Nora reached out and brushed away the moss. Her fingers froze. Fingernail marks, thin, ragged, etched into the stone. She leaned closer. Beneath the grime, faint grooves formed the letter A. Or maybe H. Ranger stiffened. His hackles rose, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Nora felt it more than heard it, deep and primal. The forest was too quiet. No birds, no wind. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. Then, faintly, from somewhere deeper in the ridge, a sound, metallic, a dull, deliberate clang. Nora straightened, heart hammering. Someone was down there. She glanced at Ranger. His ears twitched towards the noise, every muscle wired tight. "Stay," she whispered, but he didn't. He lunged forward, disappearing into the brush. "Ranger!" Her boots slipped on the wet ground as she chased after him, ducking through brambles until she reached the outcrop. The sound had stopped. Only Ranger's heavy breathing filled the air. He was pawing at a section of soil near the base of the rock, snout pressed low. Nora crouched and ran her hand along the edge of the slab. There, a narrow gap, barely wide enough for a hand. Cold air poured through it, smelling of earth and metal and something else, something sterile. She shone her flashlight inside. The beam hit rough stone, then a flicker of color. Blue fabric. A child's sleeve, maybe. She swallowed hard and reached out, but the opening was too tight. Ranger barked again, twice in quick succession. The FAMA code. Object located. Not animal. Her throat went dry. She backed away, pulling the radio from her vest, then stopped. Her thumb hovered over the transmit button. Sheriff Harper wouldn't listen. Not after last time. Not after she'd been labeled the mountain recluse with a rescue dog and ghosts for company. Instead, she reached for her satellite link, the one she kept for emergencies she couldn't explain to anyone else. She hit a familiar frequency. "Cal," she said when the static cleared. "I need you to trace a location for me. Quietly." The voice on the other end hesitated. "How bad?" She looked at the handkerchief still in her palm. Bad enough. When she ended the call, the fog had begun to lift, revealing the valley below, a long sweep of pine and shadow stretching toward the distant town she'd avoided for years. Ranger sat beside her, silent now, eyes locked on the stone. She felt the weight of his stare, like he was asking a question she didn't want to answer. "You think someone's been keeping them alive?" she whispered. Ranger blinked once, slow and steady. The wind shifted, carrying a faint scent she couldn't place. Soap, maybe, or something chemical. It was out of place here, in the raw smell of pine and decay. She pocketed the handkerchief, her fingers trembling. The silence of the ridge pressed closer, heavier. For years she had told herself this solitude healed her, that leaving Denver, leaving the wreckage of her life, was salvation. But now, standing in the fog with her dog staring into the earth, she realized the truth. The mountains hadn't healed her. They'd been keeping her quiet. She glanced back at the slab one last time. Ranger stood beside it, tail still, head bowed slightly as if he understood something she didn't. The forest wasn't silent anymore. It was listening. And for the first time in 4 years, Echo Ridge had given up a sound, a whisper from beneath the ground, faint and human. Ranger growled low, the sound curling into the mist. Nora tightened her grip on his collar. "Easy, boy." He didn't move. His body pointed toward the ridge like a compass. Nora looked into the trees, the fog swirling in pale ribbons. Someone was out there, watching. And if the mountains had been silent this long, it was because they had been protecting a secret no one dared to dig up, until now. The fog never really left Echo Ridge. It only thinned enough to let you believe the sun might break through. By morning, the valley looked the same as it always had, quiet, harmless, pretending not to know what it was hiding. But Ranger knew. He'd been pacing since dawn, nose pressed to the cabin floorboards, whining low and sharp. When Nora stepped outside, he bolted straight to the ridgeline, barking in short, coded bursts. 2, then 3, then silence. It wasn't random. It was the old FEMA signal. Presence detected. Nora followed, boots crunching through frost and pine needles. Ranger was at the outcrop again, fur bristled, digging with the urgency of an animal who didn't believe in coincidence. His claws tore at the moss-covered ground, sending dirt flying. When he paused, chest heaving, she caught sight of something glinting beneath the surface. A metal clasp. Small. Old. She brushed it free. A rusted hair clip shaped like a butterfly. It meant nothing, and everything. "Ranger," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You found something, didn't you?" He barked once, sharp and insistent. Nora slipped the clip into her pocket and took out her radio. "Echo County Dispatch, this is Hayes up on the ridge. I found something near the old quarry trail. You better send Harper." Static. Then a sigh. "Hayes, it's Bill Harper. What now?" "I think it's connected to the Carver case. You need to come out here." There was a pause long enough to carry judgment. 4 years, Nora. You've been on this ghost hunt since they pulled you out of Denver. Maybe it's time you stopped chasing every shadow your dog digs up. Her grip on the radio tightened. It's not a shadow, Bill. It's evidence. He chuckled, cold, almost pitying. Or maybe it's just another stray thing washed down by rain. Go home, Nora. Let the mountain rest. The radio clicked dead. Ranger let out a sound somewhere between a growl and a groan, pacing back and forth, ears twitching as if he'd understood every word. Nora knelt beside him. They don't listen, do they? But you do. The dog's tail twitched once. Then he took off again, this time pushing deeper into the woods. Ranger! She followed the blur of black and tan fur through the undergrowth, branches snapping at her sleeves. The forest grew denser, the light thinner. Then she saw it, another slab of limestone, bigger than the last, half swallowed by moss and rot. Ranger circled it, barking in a rhythmic pulse. Nora pressed a hand to the surface. Cold, slick. She wiped it clean with her sleeve, and froze. Scratches, not from claws, fingernails. 4 distinct lines dragging downward, each ending in a faint smear of what could have been rust or dried blood. Beside it, etched shallow into the stone, were 2 letters, A and H. Nora's pulse thudded in her ears. Ah, H, Ranger whimpered, pawing at the dirt near her boots. Beneath the surface, the ground was soft, too soft, freshly disturbed. She dropped to her knees, heart pounding, and started digging with her bare hands. A few inches down, the soil turned darker, almost clay-like. Then her fingers hit something hard. She pulled. A strip of cloth tore loose, the same blue as the sleeve she'd glimpsed inside the cave yesterday. It was damp, but not decayed. Someone had been here recently. Ranger began to bark again. Fast, sharp, patterned. Code for movement detected. Nora looked up, scanning the trees. The forest had gone still again, except for that strange undercurrent of wind that didn't sound like wind. A shuffle. A whisper of fabric. "Who's there?" she called. No answer. Ranger's body stiffened. His head turned toward the east slope. Then, without warning, he lunged forward, teeth bared, barking in furious repetition. Nora ran after him, crashing through the brush, but by the time she reached the clearing, he'd stopped. He was standing over a small pile of stones arranged in a perfect circle. At the center was a tin can, rusted shut. She pried it open. Inside lay a folded page torn from a child's notebook. On it, faint pencil marks formed a shaky drawing, 2 stick figures holding hands under a sun. Below them, scrawled in a child's uneven letters, it read, "We're still here." Her stomach dropped. Ranger whined softly and nudged her hand, eyes wide and unblinking. For a moment, Nora couldn't breathe. She looked toward the ridge, where the fog thickened again, curling like smoke. "Someone's keeping them alive," she whispered. She turned the note over. There was a faint stamp in the corner, a government insignia she half recognized. The words around it were faded, but she caught enough to make her skin crawl. Project Haven. Ranger barked again, startling her from the trance. This time it wasn't a search pattern, it was alarm. The hairs on his back stood straight, his gaze locked past her shoulder. Nora turned. Through the trees, a flicker of movement, a man's silhouette retreating into the fog. "Hey!" she shouted, sprinting after it. But by the time she reached the ridge, the figure had vanished. Only the echo of footsteps remained, fading downhill. She knelt, pressing a trembling hand against the earth where he'd stood. Warm, fresh. Whoever it was, he'd been close. Listening, watching. Ranger pressed against her side, growling low. "It's okay, boy," she whispered, though the words felt hollow. "We're not done. Not this time." She folded the note, slid it into her pocket beside the handkerchief, and stood. Ranger looked up at her, chest rising fast, waiting for command. "Show me," she said quietly. He trotted forward, nose to the ground, disappearing into the mist again. As she followed, Nora felt something stir in her chest, a pulse she hadn't felt in years. It wasn't hope, it was instinct. The same primal surge that had once kept her alive on rescue missions and now whispered the same truth her dog already knew. The mountain wasn't done speaking, and neither was she. The night wouldn't let her sleep. The forest groaned with wind, and each time the cabin creaked, Nora's mind replayed the sound of Ranger's bark, the one that meant, "found something human." She sat at her kitchen table, the handkerchief and the rusted hair clip laid out like evidence. Between them, the page from the tin can, still damp, with the words that refused to fade. "We're still here." Nora stared at the faint stamp again. Project Haven. The name itched in her brain. She'd seen it before, buried in an old FEMA memo years ago. Something about relocation shelters for miners during emergencies. Except there'd never been any emergencies up here. She needed help. Someone who knew how to read the things government files didn't say. She picked up a satellite phone and scrolled through a list of old numbers, stopping on one that hadn't been used in almost 5 years. When the call connected, a woman's voice answered, groggy but alert. "You realize it's 3 a.m, right?" "Olivia, it's Nora." There was a pause. "You're alive." "Barely. I found something at Echo Ridge. 2 kids. Or what's left of them. Maybe alive." That woke her up. "The Carver girls?" "Could be. I need your equipment. The seismic scanner, gas sensors, thermal cam. You still have them?" Olivia exhaled into the static. "You're serious?" "I wouldn't call if I wasn't. I'll be there by dawn." When Nora ended the call, Ranger was sitting by the door, head tilted, as if he'd understood every word. "We're not alone in this, boy," she murmured. He pressed his nose to her palm, then turned back to the window, staring into the dark as if waiting for something to move. By sunrise, the sound of tires crunching on gravel broke the morning silence. A silver Jeep wound its way up the narrow trail, headlights cutting through the mist. Olivia Park stepped out, a tall woman in her 40s, hair tied back, eyes sharp as the mountain air. She wore a windbreaker with a patch still stitched on the shoulder. "Search Division." "Jesus, Nora," she said, glancing around. "You weren't kidding about isolation. You've gone full mountain ghost." Nora almost smiled. Ghosts don't make phone calls. Ranger approached, sniffed her boots, then wagged his tail once, reserved approval. "Still got the old instincts," Olivia said, crouching to scratch his neck. "You've kept him sharp. He's the only one who listens." They hiked to the ridge together, Ranger leading. The forest was slick from last night's rain, and the air carried that metallic scent again, faint but distinct. Olivia stopped every few yards to plant a small sensor into the ground, watching the readings flicker on her tablet. "Airflow under the ridge," she muttered. "Consistent. There's definitely a cavity down there." Ranger barked twice and ran ahead, nose low, tail stiff. He stopped near the limestone outcrop, the one marked with the scratched letters A and H. He began pawing at a gap beneath it, growling softly. Olivia crouched, feeling the draft. "Cold air coming up. That's not natural ventilation. Someone tunneled this." Nora scanned the ground. Tire tracks. Not old. Faint tread marks in the mud, partially washed out by rain. "Someone's been here recently." Olivia pulled out her camera and snapped a photo. "Maybe a hiker." Nora shook her head. "No hiker drives this far up without a truck, and no truck parks in the middle of nowhere unless they have something to hide. They followed the faint tracks down a slope toward a small clearing where the grass was flattened, as if something heavy had rested there. Nora knelt beside a patch of damp soil. "Look at this. Fresh oil leak. 2, maybe 3 days old." Olivia frowned. "You think whoever took the Carver girls still comes back?" "Maybe not them," Nora said quietly, "but someone who knows where they are." Ranger let out a sudden low growl, staring toward a cluster of spruce trees. His ears twitched, tail straight. He was listening. Nora froze, trusting his instincts more than her own eyes. The forest was still. Then came the sound. Barely audible at first, a faint metallic rattle. Chains. Ranger moved forward slowly, head low. Nora followed, pulse hammering. The noise stopped. She scanned the brush, flashlight sweeping through tangled branches until it hit something. A padlock. Old rusted, dangling from a loop of chain embedded into a tree trunk. The bark around it was scarred as if something, or someone, had been bound there. Olivia's voice was barely a whisper. "Who the hell locks a tree?" Ranger stepped closer, sniffing the chain. His ears folded back. Then he barked once, hard, and Nora jumped as a flock of crows erupted from the trees above them, their cries tearing through the still air. When the sound faded, the forest felt emptier somehow. Nora reached out and touched the metal. It was cold, but not ancient, recent enough that the links still had a faint sheen under the rust. She took a deep breath. This isn't just a crime scene. It's a message. Olivia gave her a look. "From who?" "From whoever wants us to know they're still out there." They carried the chain back to the clearing and packed up the sensors. The readings were strange, intermittent pockets of carbon dioxide, like old air being forced through narrow vents, a sign of man-made tunnels. On the hike back, Nora stopped suddenly. The Jeep's windshield was covered in dust that hadn't been there before. Someone had written a word with their finger. "Run." Olivia's face drained of color. "We weren't followed." "Not followed," Nora said softly, glancing toward the tree line. "Watched." Ranger barked once, short and low, a warning, the kind that ended every search mission right before something went wrong. Olivia turned to Nora. "What do we do now?" Nora looked at the ridge. The mist was rising again, curling like smoke from an unseen fire. "We find out what's breathing under that mountain," she said, "before it finds us." Ranger stood beside her, tail motionless, eyes fixed on the dark mouth of the forest, as if he already knew what waited inside. The wind had shifted by the time they returned to the ridge. It wasn't the soft whisper that brushed through pines. It was heavier, the kind that carried things it shouldn't. The scent of oil, metal, something mechanical buried in earth. Ranger was the first to sense it. His ears twitched, head snapping toward the far side of the ridge where the limestone jutted up like broken teeth. He barked once, sharply, and started toward it. "Ranger, wait!" Nora called, but he was already gone, disappearing into a curtain of brush. She followed with Olivia close behind, their boots crunching through damp needles and brittle twigs. When they caught up, Ranger was pawing at a wall of rock, half hidden under a tangle of fallen branches. He dug until his claws struck stone, then stopped, nose pressed low, sniffing the air. Nora crouched and pushed the branches aside. Beneath them, a thin crack split the rock face, just wide enough for a person to slide through if they turned sideways. A faint current of air flowed out, cold and steady. Olivia held out a small sensor. "There's movement in there, temperature fluctuations. This isn't a cave, Nora. Someone built this." Nora's flashlight beam cut through the darkness of the opening. Inside, the air shimmered faintly with dust. The walls weren't rough like natural stone. They were smooth, cut by tools. "It's man-made," she said quietly. "A shelter, maybe, or something worse." Ranger's tail went stiff. He sniffed the opening, then backed away, whining deep in his throat. Nora felt the sound vibrate in her chest. "Something's off," Olivia said, adjusting her gear. "If this is connected to Project Haven, we should call it in. FBI, state police, someone with backup." Nora shook her head. "Not yet. Last time I trusted law enforcement out here, they buried more than they found. We'll go in first, confirm what it is." Olivia frowned. "You always did have a death wish. Just unfinished work." They marked the location and hiked back toward the cabin for supplies. The woods were unnervingly quiet. Even the birds had gone mute. Ranger walked close, his head swiveling at every sound. When they reached the clearing, Nora stopped cold. The ground near the porch was marked with footprints, 2 sets, deep and deliberate, circling the cabin. Olivia knelt to inspect them. "Size 11, maybe 12. Heavy boots, not yours." Nora's pulse quickened. They didn't just walk by, they stopped. The doorknob bore faint smudges, glove prints, fresh enough that moisture still clung to them. Inside, nothing looked disturbed, but Ranger wouldn't step over the threshold. He stood rigid at the doorframe, staring into the shadows of the cabin, growling low. "What is it, boy?" Nora whispered. He growled again, deeper now, pacing toward the back window. The curtains swayed slightly, though the air was still. Nora followed his gaze and saw it, a handprint on the glass. Small, child-sized. Her breath caught. "Olivia!" Olivia came to her side, eyes narrowing. "That wasn't there before." Ranger's bark exploded, echoing through the trees. He bolted outside, circling the cabin, hackles raised. The growl turned into a roar as he stopped at the tree line, staring into the forest. Nora grabbed her rifle from behind the door and stepped onto the porch. "Show yourself!" she shouted. No answer, only the faint rustle of leaves. Then came the smell. Cigarette smoke, faint and deliberate. Someone was close. Olivia swept her flashlight across the trees. The beam caught nothing but mist and motionless branches. Yet the forest felt alive, pulsing with unseen eyes. "Back inside," Olivia said. But Nora stayed, listening. The forest had a rhythm now, the faint creak of branches, the whisper of boots shifting on pine needles. Whoever had been watching them at the ridge was here, closer than before. Ranger barked again, a furious volley that shook through the silence. Then he stopped, head tilted. Something answered him. From deep in the forest, a whistle echoed back, 3 short notes. Sharp, human, the kind used for trained dogs. Olivia swore under her breath. "Someone knows his commands." Ranger tensed, torn between instinct and confusion. He barked once more, lower, unsure. Nora dropped to one knee beside him, gripping his collar. "Ignore it. He's trying to draw you out." The whistle came again, softer this time. Ranger trembled, ears flattening. Whoever was out there knew his FEMA signal codes, the same ones Nora had used years ago on search missions. She whispered, "They worked with us." "Who?" Olivia asked. Nora didn't answer. Her mind flashed back to Denver, her final mission before she left. A rescue gone wrong, a partner who disappeared when the truth got too close. The whistle stopped. Silence returned, thick and watchful. Ranger barked one last time, defiant and raw, breaking whatever spell had settled over the woods. The echo rolled through the valley and came back distorted, like the mountain itself was responding. Nora stood, eyes locked on the tree line. "We're not dealing with ghosts," she said. "We're dealing with someone who never wanted to be found." Olivia's jaw tightened. "Then we'd better find them first." They backed into the cabin, locking the door. Ranger lay by the threshold, chest rising and falling fast, eyes fixed on the forest beyond. Nora knelt beside him, resting her hand on his head. "Good boy," she whispered. "We're getting close, aren't we?" Ranger didn't look at her. His gaze stayed on the darkness outside. His body trembled, not from fear, but from focus. He was waiting for the next sound, the next move. The forest beyond the ridge wasn't sleeping anymore. It was awake and watching. By dawn, the sound of engines broke the stillness of Echo Ridge. 3 black SUVs crawled up the gravel road, tires grinding against the frost. The morning fog parted just enough for the federal emblems to glint on their doors. Nora watched from the porch, shotgun resting across her knees, as men in dark jackets spread out through the clearing. Ranger stood at her side, fur bristling, tail low, eyes fixed on the one man stepping out of the lead vehicle. Ethan Cole. She remembered his name from the headlines. The federal agent who led the original Carver investigation 4 years ago. The man who'd declared the girls presumed dead when the trail went cold. "Ms. Hayes," he said, approaching with the calm tone of a man used to control. "You were instructed years ago to stay clear of federal cases. What are you doing digging around in Echo Ridge?" "I live here," she said evenly. "And I didn't dig anything. My dog did." Ethan's eyes flicked to Ranger, who growled low, the sound dark and warning. "Control your animal," he said. "He's more trustworthy than most agents," Nora replied. Olivia stepped out from the cabin, a file folder tucked under her arm. "Agent Cole," she greeted, tone cool. "Long time no see. Didn't expect to find you chasing ghosts in the mountains." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Park, you shouldn't be here either." Olivia ignored him, sliding the folder onto the hood of his SUV. "We've got seismic data, chemical readings, and air movement consistent with a man-made chamber inside the ridge. You want to tell me why that sounds like the kind of thing Project Haven would use?" The color drained from his face, so subtle it could have been a trick of the light. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Oh, I do," she said. "You ran the Denver branch before it was shut down. Protective shelters for displaced miners, right? Except half those kids were never registered. Where did they go, Ethan?" He stepped forward, voice low. "Watch yourself, Olivia. That project is classified." "Classified doesn't mean innocent," Nora cut in. "The Carver girls didn't just vanish. Someone took them, and you buried the case." Ethan turned to her, eyes sharp. "You don't know what this is. You think you found a cave, but what you've actually done is open a wound that should have stayed closed." Ranger growled again, louder this time, the fur on his neck standing like static. He took a step toward Ethan, lips curling back to reveal his teeth. Nora didn't stop him. Ethan's hand twitched toward his holster, but he caught himself. "If that dog bites a federal agent, he won't bite unless he smells a liar," Nora said. For a long moment, no one moved. The air thickened between them, tension coiling tight. Finally, Ethan turned away. "We'll conduct a survey of the ridge. Stay off it. That's an order." He signaled to his team and walked toward the vehicles. The agents began unloading gear, scanners, floodlights, portable fencing. They were walling off the ridge. Olivia muttered under her breath, "He's not here to investigate, he's here to erase." By afternoon, the federal tents went up, and men with rifles patrolled the perimeter. Nora watched from the tree line, Ranger pressed against her leg. "He's covering something," she said. Ranger huffed, nose twitching towards the camp. Nora followed his gaze. Ethan stood near a table covered with documents, speaking into a satellite phone. She could read the tension in his shoulders, the way his hand kept touching the scar under his ear. That night, the ridge was lit by floodlights that turned the forest white and unreal. Nora and Olivia stayed in the cabin, whispering over maps. Ranger lay by the door, restless, ears flicking at every sound. Around midnight, he lifted his head and growled, a low rumble that made Nora's blood go cold. Then came the noise outside, crunching gravel, soft footsteps circling the porch. Olivia killed the lantern. "Federal patrol?" "Too quiet," Nora whispered. She cocked her rifle and moved to the window. Shadows moved between the trees. 3 of them. No insignias, no flashlights. Ranger was on his feet, teeth bared. The first gunshot shattered the glass. Nora dropped to the floor, pulling Olivia with her. Ranger lunged forward, barking furiously as splinters exploded across the room. "Back door!" Olivia shouted. They crawled toward the rear exit. Ranger stayed behind, his growl turning to a snarl as he charged the front. Nora heard a man curse outside, followed by another shot. The sound tore through her like lightning. "Ranger!" she screamed. Olivia grabbed her arm. "Move, Nora!" They stumbled into the forest, ducking low, running toward the slope. The night swallowed them whole. Behind them, the cabin burned, a single roaring bloom of fire lighting the trees. When they finally stopped, lungs burning, Nora turned back. Ranger limped from the darkness. Muzzle streaked with blood, but eyes blazing with fury. He collapsed at her feet, whining softly. "Oh, God!" Nora whispered, kneeling beside him. She pressed her hands against his side, feeling for the wound, a graze. Nothing fatal. She tore her sleeve and wrapped it tight. "You did good, boy. You did damn good." Olivia scanned the ridge behind them. "They wanted us dead. That wasn't random. They don't shoot at people who don't matter," Nora said quietly. She looked back towards the distant glow of her cabin burning in the valley. The smoke curled up into the mountain sky like a warning flare. Ranger raised his head weakly, ears twitching towards the direction of the ridge. Nora followed his gaze. Somewhere beyond those trees, beneath that stone, was the secret they'd killed to keep buried. Nora brushed her hand over his fur, her voice steady now, her grief sharpened into resolve. "They took my home. They won't take the truth." Ranger pushed himself up, standing beside her, limping but defiant. His body trembled, but his eyes never left the ridge. The night wind swept through the forest, carrying the faint echo of distant machinery, the same hum she'd heard beneath the ground days ago. Nora stared into the darkness, her voice barely a whisper. "We're going to finish what we started." Ranger answered with a single bark, deep and certain, like a promise between them. The mountain was awake now, and so was she. The wind on Echo Ridge turned colder that night, heavy with a scent Nora hadn't felt in years, metal, decay, and fear. Ranger led the way, nose low, tail stiff, tracking something invisible but certain. Every instinct in Nora screamed that they were getting close. The crack in the mountain wall was barely visible, hidden beneath layers of moss and fallen pine branches. But when Ranger pressed forward, pawing at the ground, a hollow echo answered. The cave breathed. Nora knelt, her flashlight trembling in her grip. "There's air movement," she whispered. "This isn't just a cave. Someone made this." Inside, the passage grew tighter, the walls slick with condensation. The beam of her light revealed streaks of something dark and crusted. Old blood. A metallic smell clung to the damp rock. Olivia, walking behind her, muttered, "If this was meant to hide something, they did one hell of a job." Ranger froze. His ears twitched. Then came a low growl, one that Nora had learned long ago wasn't aggression, but warning. He advanced slowly, head turned, as though listening to something deep within the stone. The next sound chilled them both. A whisper, fragile, human. "Help," Nora's heart lurched. She swung the light toward the noise, illuminating a small hollow at the back of the cavern. Two shapes huddled together, thin, trembling, their eyes wide against the glare. The Carver girls. Lena. Maren? Nora dropped to her knees. The girls flinched, but when Ranger stepped forward, whining softly, they recognized safety. The older one sobbed, clutching her sister's hand. Olivia covered her mouth, eyes wet. "Oh my God, they're alive!" Before they could move, the echo of boots scraped from behind. Flashlights flared. Ethan Cole stepped into view, his badge glinting, but the look in his eyes was wrong. Empty, resigned. "You shouldn't have come here," he said quietly. Nora rose, placing herself between him and the girls. "You knew," she said. "All along, you knew." Ethan's jaw clenched. "I tried to protect them, at first, but Project Haven wasn't what they told us. They said we were saving kids from dangerous homes. We were delivering them." Olivia's voice cut through the cave like a blade. "Delivering to who?" Ethan didn't answer. His men stepped forward, weapons raised. Ranger barked, a sharp, commanding sound, and the cavern erupted in chaos. Nora lunged for cover as gunfire thundered, bullets ricocheting off stone. Ethan shouted orders lost beneath the roar. And then came the moment that burned itself into her memory forever. A single muzzle flash. A bark. A body hitting the ground. Ranger had leapt. The bullet struck him in the shoulder. He stumbled, but didn't fall, pushing forward, snapping his jaws at the gunman's wrist, forcing the weapon away. Nora screamed his name, her flashlight spinning across the cave floor. "Ranger!" He turned to her, panting hard, blood already soaking through his fur. She ran to him, sliding to her knees. No, stay still, stay with me." Olivia fired back toward the attackers, while Nora ripped fabric from her sleeve, pressing it against the wound. "You're okay, boy, you're okay." But she could feel the tremor beneath his skin, the shallow rise and fall of his chest. The bullet had gone deep, tearing through muscle. Linda Cross burst into the cave at that moment, gun in hand. Her shot struck true. Ethan's weapon clattered against the rock as he fell back, disarmed. His men scattered, panicked, into the darkness. When the silence returned, it wasn't peace. It was the sound of breathing, ragged and fragile, from Ranger. Nora lifted his head gently into her lap. His eyes flickered, still alert despite the pain. She whispered through tears, "You did it, Ranger. You found them." He blinked slowly, pressing his muzzle against her wrist, weak but deliberate. Ranger tried to stand. He pushed himself up, paws trembling, blood dripping down his leg. He managed 2 steps before his hindquarters buckled. Nora caught him just before he hit the ground. "Easy," she breathed, wrapping her arms around him. "You're not done yet, but you're resting, okay?" Outside in the cold dawn air, she bandaged him again. His breath steamed in short bursts. When he tried to walk, he staggered, his paw sliding in the dirt. Nora steadied him. "Not now," she said softly. "You need time. Weeks, maybe more." He looked at her, understanding in his eyes. The kind that never needed words. Even so, when morning broke, he was on his feet again. Limping, yes, blood still seeping through the bandage. But leading, always leading. He followed the scent of the girl's trail all the way to the clearing where rescue helicopters waited. By the time Nora handed the girls over to the medics, she could barely see through her tears. Ranger lay beside her, exhausted, but his gaze stayed fixed on the cave behind them, as if daring it to breathe again. She knelt beside him, whispering, "You'll heal, Ranger, I promise." He blinked once, slow and certain, then rested his head on her knee. And though she knew he would never run the same again, Nora also knew something else. That courage didn't vanish when the body weakened. It simply found new ways to stand guard. That night, as Echo Ridge fell silent again, Nora sat beside her wounded partner, feeling his slow, steady breathing. Somewhere deep within the forest, a single echo answered, a faint bark rolling across the trees. The mountain remembered, and so did he. Rain swept across the valley the next morning, washing the smoke from the ridge. Federal agents swarmed Echo Ridge like ants, combing the collapsed tunnel, marking evidence, photographing the remains of what had been hidden for years. The mountain that had once held its secrets now echoed with the hum of generators and radios crackling orders. Ethan Cole sat cuffed in the back of an armored SUV, head bowed, face pale under the flash of red and blue lights. He looked smaller now, stripped of authority, the arrogance drained from his voice. Nora stood across the clearing, soaked to the bone, arms folded as she watched him. Ranger lay beside her on a blanket, his front leg bandaged, eyes half open but alert. Every time Ethan glanced in her direction, Ranger's ears twitched and a low growl rippled from his chest. "He remembers," Nora murmured, stroking his fur. "He never forgets." Olivia approached, her face tight with exhaustion. FBI confirmed Linda's inside giving a full deposition. "It's bad, Nora. Project Haven wasn't just one program, it was an entire network. Shelters, orphan placements, fake NGOs. They funneled kids like livestock through the Rockies for years." Nora's stomach clenched. And he was their shield. "Yeah," Olivia said, nodding toward Ethan. "Cole kept the Bureau from digging too deep, signed every clearance, rerouted every report." The SUV door opened and an agent hauled Ethan out. His wrists were bound, his eyes unfocused. When he spoke, his voice cracked. "You don't understand what they were capable of. You think I wanted this?" Nora stepped closer. "You made sure no one could find them. You called it protecting evidence. I call it burying children." Ethan's lip trembled. "You don't know what it's like to fight something bigger than the law." "I know exactly what it's like," she said, her voice sharp as broken glass. "And I had to lose everything before I learned that silence is worse than guilt." The agents led him away, but he turned once, eyes flicking toward Ranger. "That dog," he muttered. "He wouldn't stop. You should have left it alone." Ranger growled again, deep and guttural, as if rejecting the very sound of his name coming from Ethan's mouth. Hours later, Nora stood inside the temporary command tent, its canvas flapping under the wind. Linda sat across from two federal interrogators, her face lined with years of regret. Her wrists were free, but her voice shook with the weight of what she was saying. "I was part of Project Haven when it started," she said. "We thought we were helping rural kids, orphans, runaways, victims of abuse. The funding came from a federal welfare grant. But then files started disappearing. Kids assigned to non-existent foster homes. I confronted Ethan's superior, and the next week my credentials were revoked. They told me if I ever talked, I'd vanish too." One of the agents asked quietly, "Why come forward now?" Linda's eyes flicked to Nora, who stood outside the tent, watching through the rain-streaked plastic window. "Because she didn't stop, and because that dog found what I couldn't live with losing." The agents exchanged glances. "We'll need every piece of evidence you have." Linda reached into her jacket, pulling out a flash drive. "You'll find everything there, shipping logs, payment trails, and a list of names that go higher than you think." By nightfall, the story was already breaking on national news. FBI uncovers child trafficking ring hidden in federal program. Nora didn't care about the headlines. She stayed by Ranger's side in the medic van, the hum of machines steady around them. His breathing had evened out, his tail thumped once against the cot when she touched him. "You're tougher than any of us," she whispered. "You were right from the start." Olivia leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "He's a miracle, Nora. They said if the bullet had been an inch closer, he wouldn't have made it." "He made it," Nora said softly, brushing her hand along Ranger's muzzle, "because he knew someone still needed saving." Later, when the agents asked for a formal statement, Nora sat beneath a bare bulb, her hands clasped on the table. The recorder clicked on. "Ms. Hayes," the interviewer began, "you were the first to uncover evidence leading to the exposure of Project Haven. Can you describe how it began?" Nora exhaled slowly. "It began with silence. This ridge has been quiet for years, but that kind of silence isn't peace, it's fear. And my dog, Ranger, he didn't buy it. He knew there was something still breathing under that mountain." The agent nodded, jotting notes. "You could have walked away, especially after the attack. Why didn't you?" She looked up, her eyes steady. "Because he didn't bark for noise. He barked because someone was still waiting to be found." The room went still. Even the agent's pen froze mid-air. Outside, the storm had lifted. Through the open flap of the tent, Nora could see the faint line of dawn painting the peaks in silver. Ranger stood on 3 legs now, stitches pulling at his shoulder, but his tail wagged weakly when he saw her. Nora knelt beside him, pressing her forehead to his. "We did it, boy. We gave them a voice." He licked her hand once, eyes calm, as if to say, "It's not over yet." Somewhere behind them, an agent shouted orders as another team prepared to descend deeper into the collapsed tunnels. The mountain had more to tell, Nora could feel it, but for now, the truth had air again. As she and Ranger stepped outside, the valley filled with light, and the wind carried a sound that almost resembled a bark echoing through the ridge. Not a warning this time, but a promise. 3 months had passed since the storm broke over Echo Ridge, but the mountain still carried its echo. The snow had melted into soft rivers that ran between the roots of the pines, washing away the last signs of the chaos that had once hidden beneath the ground. The FBI had packed up weeks ago, the tents, the searchlights, the generators, all gone. What remained was a modest memorial, a stone marker engraved with simple words, "For those who were silenced, and for those who were found." Nora stood before it now, her coat zipped high against the chill. The air smelled of wet cedar and moss. Beside her, Ranger sat, his fur grown in over the wound, though a thin scar still marked his shoulder. His eyes were steady, calm, but never still. He scanned the tree line as though waiting for something only he could sense. Nora knelt, brushing the snow from the base of the memorial. "They'll never know your name," she said softly. "But they'll know you barked until someone listened." Ranger's ears flicked at her voice. His tail moved once, just enough to let her know he was still listening too. Behind them, a car door closed. Olivia Park walked up the trail, her boots crunching through the frost. She carried a duffel bag slung over one shoulder, her face drawn but lighter than before. "You really decided to stay," she said, stopping beside Nora. "I did," Nora replied. "Someone has to keep watch. The mountain's quiet now, but that kind of quiet doesn't last. It never does." Olivia glanced toward the horizon where fog curled through the trees. "You could come back with me. Start over. Washington needs people like you. Hell, they're building a task force because of you." Nora smiled faintly. "I don't think the city would suit me anymore." She looked down at Ranger. "Besides, he wouldn't forgive me for leaving the ridge." Olivia laughed softly. "Yeah, he doesn't look like he'd trade this view for an apartment." Her tone shifted, more serious. "I'll check in every few months, and Nora, you did good. Better than most of us ever could." Nora didn't answer. She simply reached out, pulled Olivia into a brief hug, and whispered, "Go where the silence breaks first." Olivia nodded, eyes glistening, then turned and walked back toward her car. The engine rumbled to life, tires crunching over gravel until the sound faded into the forest's heartbeat. Nora stayed long after the car disappeared. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of pine sap and distant rain. She looked toward the old cabin standing at the edge of the clearing, her home again. The roof still needed fixing, the porch sagged, but it was hers. The place where everything began, and where somehow she'd found her purpose again. Inside, the fire had gone out. Nora knelt to stoke the embers, the faint orange glow flickering across her face. Ranger settled beside her, resting his head on her boot. His breathing was slow, content. She picked up the folder lying on the table, files from the FBI, newspaper clippings, and a handwritten note from Linda Cross, now under witness protection. It read, "You didn't just find the lost, Nora. You found us all." Nora folded the note and placed it in the drawer. Then she walked to the window. The forest stretched endlessly before her, vast and unknowable. Somewhere out there, the wind carried stories she hadn't heard yet, voices waiting, truths still buried. At the edge of the tree line, a deer moved through the mist, pausing to look towards the cabin before vanishing again. The forest seemed alive, watchful, almost grateful. Ranger lifted his head, eyes following the same direction. He gave a low rumble, not quite a growl, not quite a sigh. Nora smiled. "You still hear them, don't you?" she said quietly. "The ones we couldn't reach." Ranger's gaze didn't waver. He was listening. Always listening. Outside, the clouds broke open for a moment, letting through a soft stream of sunlight that fell across the porch. The light caught on Ranger's fur, turning it gold. He rose slowly, stretched, and walked out onto the steps, his paws making soft prints in the damp wood. Nora followed him out, hands tucked into her coat. Together they stood in silence, facing the forest that had taken so much and, in its own way, given back more. "They'll come again," she said after a long moment. "Different names, different faces, but they'll come, and we'll be ready." Ranger turned his head toward her, eyes bright, tail swaying once. The ridge was quiet, but not empty. Beneath the stillness, life moved, wind through branches, birds returning to the thawing air, and somewhere far below, water running through the bones of the mountain. As the sun dipped low, Nora sat on the porch steps, the same spot where she and Ranger had first watched the snow fall months ago. The quiet no longer frightened her. It felt earned, sacred. She looked at the scar, along Ranger's shoulder, then at the line of trees stretching into the dark. "We did what we came to do," she whispered, "but maybe the mountain still has something left to say." Ranger lay beside her, eyes fixed on the forest's edge, body still as stone, but every muscle alert. The wind shifted again, and for a fleeting second, Nora could have sworn she heard it. A faint bark carried through the pines, distant yet familiar. She smiled, her breath misting in the cold air. "Guess some echoes never die," she said. Ranger's tail brushed against her boot, a silent answer in the growing dusk. The ridge had quieted, yes, but the kind of quiet that waits, not forgets. A full year had passed since the night the mountain gave up its secrets. The forest had healed, the trails had opened again, and the town of Garland County was no longer a place whispered about in fear. Echo Ridge had changed, and so had Nora Hayes. The cabin was no longer just a shelter for one woman and her dog. It had become the headquarters of Echo Ridge Rescue, a volunteer network dedicated to finding the missing and saving abandoned animals across the mountain counties. The idea came quietly one evening as Nora sat by the fire, Ranger's head resting on her knee. She'd said aloud, almost absently, "If he can find the forgotten, maybe I can help others listen." Now, the small team of 8 volunteers operated out of what used to be an old ranger station down the road. Its walls were covered in maps, pinpoints marking every recovery, every lost person brought home. On a corkboard near the entrance hung dozens of photos, rescued dogs, hikers reunited with families, and one in the center, a German shepherd sitting proudly beside 2 smiling girls. June and Maddie. They visited often, escorted by their foster parents who lived in town. The girls had grown stronger, their laughter now echoing freely through the cabin. Maddie always brought Ranger a bag of dried chicken treats. June, quieter, preferred to sit beside him on the porch, stroking his fur while staring at the woods. "Do you think he still remembers?" she asked once. Nora, cleaning gear nearby, smiled. "He remembers everything worth remembering." June looked up. "Does that mean he remembers us?" "He never forgot you," Nora said softly. Ranger, as if understanding, lifted his head and gave a low, comforting woof. June giggled for the first time in months. Word of Nora's work began to spread. At first it was just locals, farmers, hikers, families who'd lost pets to storms or wild predators. Then came the news crews, the human interest stories about the woman and her war dog. They told how a retired search officer and her aging shepherd turned a haunted mountain into a beacon of hope. But Nora avoided interviews. Whenever cameras showed up, she let others speak. She preferred to stay in the background, letting Ranger take the spotlight. One afternoon, the sheriff of Garland County, a gruff man named Tom Bennett, stopped by the station. He leaned against the doorframe, watching Nora stack medical supplies. "You know," he said, "people used to avoid this ridge. Now they bring food up here like it's a pilgrimage." Nora smiled faintly. Maybe it's not the ridge they're visiting. Maybe it's what it stands for now. Tom nodded toward Ranger, who was dozing near the doorway. "Heard someone left flowers by that trail sign again. Same spot every week." Nora set down the box she was holding. "I know who it is. A woman who lost her son during the floods 5 years ago. Ranger found his backpack last spring. She said it gave her peace." Tom hesitated, then pulled something from his jacket, a small hand-carved wooden plaque. "We made this for you," he said, setting it on the table. Nora turned it over. It read, "She barked for the ones no one else could hear." She swallowed hard. "You got the pronoun wrong," she said quietly. Tom chuckled. "You really think people around here see the difference anymore?" She didn't argue. By late summer, the trail leading up to the cabin had become a local landmark. Hikers stopped to leave stones, ribbons, or scraps of fabric tied to branches, tokens of memory. Someone had painted Ranger's silhouette on the rock wall by the trailhead. It wasn't perfect, but the eyes were right. Watchful, kind, unyielding. The children in town started calling him the Guardian of the Ridge. It embarrassed Nora at first, but every time she tried to correct someone, Ranger would sit tall, as if quietly accepting the title. In early autumn, during one of the rescue drills, Ranger startled everyone by barking at a section of the northern ridge that had long been considered inaccessible. Nora followed his lead, and they discovered a missing hiker who'd fallen into a ravine 2 days earlier. The man survived, his first words to the medics trembling. "I thought I was hallucinating when I heard a dog." When the team returned, Olivia was there, camera slung around her neck. She'd come back not as an investigator, but as a friend. "You never could stay out of trouble," she teased, handing Nora a thermos of coffee. Nora laughed. "You mean Ranger can't?" Olivia looked around the small rescue station, her eyes softening. "You turned a crime scene into a sanctuary. Not many people can do that." "It wasn't me," Nora said. "He started it. I just followed." Outside, the wind picked up. The forest moved in slow waves, the same rhythm it had when it hid the truth. Only now, it whispered something gentler. Ranger, older now, sat on the porch steps, staring into the dusk. His muzzle had gone grey, and his movements were slower, but his eyes remained sharp. A group of local kids passed by, calling out, "Evening, Ranger!" He looked up, gave a soft bark, and the children cheered before running off down the path. Nora stepped beside him, hands in her jacket pockets. "You realize they think you own this town now?" Ranger didn't move, only leaned slightly into her leg, a quiet acknowledgement. Behind them, the signpost creaked in the wind. The carved plaque shimmered under the fading light, the words glowing faintly from the polish of countless hands that had touched it. She barked for the ones no one else could hear. Nora reached down, resting her hand on Ranger's head. "They're listening now," she whispered. "You did that." The valley below was coming alive again, new homes being built, hikers returning, laughter where once there had been fear. The darkness that had swallowed Echo Ridge had given way to something stronger: awareness, empathy, community. And through it all, Ranger watched. Every dusk he would limp to the same spot overlooking the ridge, his gaze fixed on the tree line. Some nights, when the wind blew just right, Nora could swear she heard a distant echo, faint barks rolling through the forest, answering his own. Perhaps memory, perhaps spirit. But to Nora it was proof that some guardians never truly leave. And so Echo Ridge stood, alive, listening, awake again. And in Garland County they no longer spoke of what was lost. They spoke of what was found. It was a clear autumn morning when the school bus wound its way up the gravel road to Echo Ridge. The valley below shimmered gold with fallen leaves, and the air smelled of pine and wood smoke. The children inside pressed their faces against the glass, whispering excitedly about the story they were about to film, the one they'd read about in their history project. The woman and the dog who saved 2 girls. Nora Hayes waited by the old wooden fence, hands tucked into her coat. She had silver strands in her hair now, but her eyes carried the same calm strength that once faced down a mountain full of secrets. Beside her lay Ranger, older, greyer, but still alert, his ears twitching with every sound in the forest. When the students climbed out, a young teacher led them forward. "Class, this is Ms. Hayes. She and her dog helped uncover what happened here years ago." Nora gave a modest smile. "Ranger did most of the work. I just tried to keep up." The children laughed softly, breaking the stillness. A little girl with freckles and a purple jacket pointed toward Ranger. "Is that the dog from the story?" Nora looked down at him. He was resting now, head on his paws, eyes half closed, soaking in the warmth of the sun. She knelt beside him and brushed her fingers through his fur, now white along the muzzle. "She didn't bark for food," Nora said gently, her voice almost a whisper. "She barked for the forgotten." The teacher raised an eyebrow. "She?" Nora smiled, still stroking Ranger. "He's more spirit than gender at this point. You'll understand when you meet his eyes." The girl crouched beside her and looked into Ranger's gaze. For a moment, the world seemed to hush. The forest wind softened, the birds paused. It was as if the ridge itself bowed its head to listen. The camera crew, a pair of high school seniors working on a local documentary, set up their tripods. One adjusted the focus toward the wooden trail marker, where a carved sign gleamed faintly in the sunlight. He didn't bark for food. He barked for the forgotten. They recorded as Nora led the children up the trail, pointing out small landmarks. The stone where they'd first found the cloth, the clearing where the FBI had set their tents, the mouth of the cave now sealed for safety. "This whole ridge used to be silent," she said, her voice carrying softly through the trees. But silence isn't peace. Sometimes it's just waiting for the right hearts to listen. As they paused near the overlook, the radio from one of the students' packs crackled faintly. A familiar voice came through. It was Olivia Park, now hosting a national podcast about unsolved rescues and recovered victims. "Some truths don't die," Olivia's voice said. "They just wait for the right hearts to listen." Nora froze for a moment, then smiled knowingly. "She still says that line every time," she murmured. "I think she means it more now." The children listened in silence. One of the boys asked, "Do you ever miss the quiet before everyone came here?" Nora shook her head. "No, the quiet before was empty. This quiet is alive." When they reached the cabin, the group gathered on the porch where the Echo Ridge rescue sign hung proudly beside the door. Photos lined the walls: rescued animals, recovered hikers, and a framed image of Ranger standing tall between two smiling girls, June and Maddie Carver. The documentary crew filmed everything: Nora feeding Ranger, children patting his head, the wind rippling through the valley. One of the boys pointed his camera directly at Nora. "Last question," he said shyly. "If you could say one thing to people watching this, what would it be?" Nora thought for a moment. She looked at Ranger, who had lifted his head again, eyes shining like amber glass. "Listen," she said simply. "Not everything that matters is loud. Sometimes the ones who can't speak are the ones who need us most." The camera lingered on her face, then shifted toward Ranger. His gaze followed the tree line, ears perked as if he still heard echoes of those lost voices deep in the woods. Then, as the final shot, the camera zoomed in on the wooden sign by the path, the same one Tom Bennett had carved years ago. He didn't bark for food, he barked for the forgotten. The wind swept across the ridge, scattering pine needles and carrying with it a single, distant bark, a low, resonant sound that faded into the valley like a memory refusing to die. The screen slowly dimmed to black. Olivia's voice from the radio returned once more. "Some truths don't die. They just wait for someone brave, enough to listen." The final text appeared across the screen, glowing softly against the dark. "He didn't bark for food. He barked for the forgotten. What's your story with a loyal pet?" A heartbeat of silence followed. Then soft music rose, a mix of wind through trees and Ranger's gentle panting, recorded years before. The outro voice spoke calmly, invitingly. "If this story touched your heart, share it. Subscribe to the German Shepherd channel for more true tales of loyalty, courage, and second chances. Every story reminds us sometimes the bravest hearts still walk on four legs." The screen faded to white. Echo Ridge stood quiet once more. But the world, it seemed, had finally learned how to listen.